The last thing I'd like to say is why I think the scenario, why I think things will improve. Now this may not apply to the US so much, but it will be in Australia and other places. And it's got to do with the Kondratiev wave. So let me go back to the presentation just for a minute. It's to do with Nikolai Kondratiev. He was a Russian economist in the 1920s. Nikolai was in charge of the Agricultural Bureau in Moscow. And he was asked by Comrade Stalin to help the Russians work out when the capitalist economies would fail, because it was clear to them that the Russian economies and the communist system was about to take over the world. Comrade Stalin wanted to know that to facilitate the process. Nikolai went ahead and did some extensive and fascinating research into commodity prices. He studied the commodities of his day, wheat, pig iron, and he discovered over the course of a couple of hundred years, commodity prices tended to make extreme lows in prices about every 50 to 60 years. On average, about 54 years. And I've just traced some of them back there a little bit. 1844, 1896, and the 1940s. And what I felt was the next lows to come would have been, and I think has been, the 1990s. Kondratiev then suggested, which he told Comrade Stalin about, that commodity prices from the lows, they go up for about 25 or 30 years. So they'd just been coming, from Kondratiev's point of view, they'd been coming out of the 1890s, the 1896. Kondratiev forecast that commodity prices would peak in the 1920s, stay that way, and then they'd drop again quite severely in the 1930s, whereupon Western economies would go into a terrible depression, like they had every 60 years or so. Nikolai made the mistake, though. He said that history would keep repeating. He didn't say it sort of like that, but he suggested that Western economies, as they had always done, would renew themselves and come out of the depression stronger than ever and go on, and commodity prices would go back up again. It was news that dear Stalin didn't like to hear very much, and Kondratiev, I believe, was condemned as the leader of the Workers' Peasant Party and spent the rest of his life in Siberia. Great shame, because he put out some good work. Nikolai tried to work out why these cycles were in existence, why they were happening. He put forward the arguments that on the upside of the wave, the fight for commodities tended to lead to very high prices. And if you go back into about prior to 1844, it was Napoleon in 1919 brought the peak. You then had the Civil War peak in the 1860s. You had the First World War bringing the peaks of commodity prices through the 1920s. And then you had Vietnam bringing the peaks throughout the 1970s. At the bottom, after the fights for resources were over, again, prices declined. People saw that there was an abundance of commodities, after which time you'd get the bottoms. I felt we saw commodity price bottoms in the very early, well, the middle 1990s, leading into 2000, from which time I think commodity prices, if we are to get what I would call the fifth wave, prices would continue going upwards for the next 30 or so years, if that's to be the case. My research also showed that any real estate downturn on the upside of those Kondratiev waves tended to be exceedingly deep but very short. One of the reasons why the real estate cycles on the upside of a Kondratiev wave are so easy to recover from is because commodity prices stay high. If commodity prices stay high, it is exceptionally good, exceedingly good for those nations that are commodity producers, like Australia is at the moment. And hence, with China on our back door, because, I mean, it's quite obvious that history is never going to repeat exactly, and with commodity waves you're looking a long way back in history, but with China on our doorstep, with India there too, both nations are prodigiously industrialising, and there's a lot of people going now into urban areas. They're building, whatever they're doing, I think is pretty much productive, producing a lot of wealth. They are digging up, or they want some of our resources. Australia's in a very good position to benefit from that. I think this is going to continue. BHP Billiton announced, I don't know if you saw it, they announced, they said so last month but have made it official, they're going to increase capital spending on iron ore mines and oil fields next year by 63%, and they'll be spending $20 billion. 1 year's money. They don't do that on a whim. They've got a lot of intelligent people working for them that try to understand all of these cycles. That they know what all the K-wave stuff is, and a lot of money. In the first 6 months of last year, an average of 220,995 Chinese people a day started using the internet for the first time. It's a lot of people, every day, every single day. The drought's over, there's floodwaters coming right through the middle of Australia. That has a lot to do with sunspots and weather patterns. Water will be abundant in this country for the next 7 or 8 years, and it's going to be very beneficial for the economy. You would have seen as well, they're opening up the Gorgon Riches, which is what Shell and Chevron are doing. The massive gas stuff they've got in the Northern Territory and up around there, that's absolute, for Australia's region, 64 billion I think is going to be involved in the next couple of years. Again, that's massive, that will affect the Australian economy. You've got Chinese demand spurring stronger Japanese growth as well. Westpac have declared the crisis over. Now, I don't know whether the bank know that or not, but they do seem to think that things are happening. So with all of that together, I think we're moving into what will be one of the most, I can't say productive because that's the wrong word, because it isn't going to be productive, because Australia, again, is going to repeat the cycle and we're going to put all our money into housing. You'll see what economists might call wealth. I think you're going to see one of the most prodigious 18-year cycles in Australia, some of the possibly the most wealth created ever that the world has ever seen in the next 18 years. It's going to come out of China and it's going to come out of India.